I know in my own practice, probably 40% of all the issues that people have are stemming from undiagnosed toxic metal problems. And that's arthritis, diabetes, whatever illness you want to discuss are in that 40%. The person's acquired toxic, and it might even be higher than that, but the person's acquired toxic metals from somewhere. And those metals are causing inflammation and nutritional imbalances in their body. And that's leading to the fancy disease that the doctor puts the name on.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode.
Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Dr. Michael Biamonte. He is a clinical nutritionist and naturopath, and we are going to discuss a variety of health issues, how he finds the root cause of those issues, and what are some of the treatments. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, and there's a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen to the show. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. My guest today is Dr. Michael Biomonte. He is a naturopath and a clinical nutritionist. He has worked with astronauts on maintaining proper nutrition in space. He is very well versed in scientific approaches and various types of testing, including genetic testing. And he talks about what we can learn from these tests and how we can apply the scientific method to a wide variety of health conditions. His specialty is working with people with gut issues and candida, but we talk about a lot of different types of things such as metal toxicity, and he is a wealth of knowledge in this field. So here he is. This is Dr. Michael Biamonte. Good morning, Michael. It's so great to have you on the show, and hope all is well. Where are you located, by the way? I never found that out.
So my office is located and has been traditionally in New York City.
Okay.
However, I'm not. I'm located in the Tampa Bay area where I've lived here since 1995. For many years, I would travel back and forth between my home in Tampa Bay up to the office in New York. But now we only do things virtually. And that's been gradual since 1987. We did our first phone consultation with somebody, I think, back then. And it's been a gradual shift over into that, and the internet really created a boom in us being able to do everything virtually.
That's amazing.
The practice is completely set up for 100% virtual service for the patients.
Oh, that's great. And we'll get into that at the end so people can contact you if they need consultation, because that's an important thing. So, but there was something we were talking about before we get into this nutritional thing that I thought was really great. And we were talking about pharmaceutical companies, and say that quote again that you just told me, because I loved it. It was so
it's the quote stems I guess from the hypocrisy of the drug companies, the insurance companies, and the orthodox medical establishment. And the quote is, there's a rule. The rule is never kill the patient with your treatment. The second rule is never cure them, because if you either kill them or cure them, they're not there to buy your drugs.
Well, that's, sad, isn't it? It's just absolutely, and diabolical too, I might add.
True. True.
And then I was just saying, after you said that, I was saying, and then give them a drug that has a side effect that they need a new drug, which is sort of part of the equation, as you mentioned.
That is definitely part of the equation. Yes.
So we're going to be talking about something more important, which is how do we move through life in taking in food and nutrients and all these things so we have an optimal, vital, healthy life So we don't need these drug companies. Now, I'm 69 years old in a couple of days. I don't take any medications, none. Which is kind of amazing when you think about people that age are on many medications, most. And I'm not
which
even
is interesting.
yeah, and I'm not I'm wouldn't. I mean, I practice, eating healthy, but I'm not like a super 100%, purity guy. I move in a lot of different ways. I mean, I don't eat sugar, I don't eat white flour, certain things that I know are just very poisonous to me.
Right.
I don't do that. I don't eat Doritos. I don't drink sodas, but I'll have stuff that's, not 100% organic or vegan or any of that stuff. I'm not plant-based. I do eat a lot of things I do eat a lot of plant, but I'm not 100%. So you can stay pretty healthy with about, I don't know, 75 to 80% purity in this thing. I'm just picking a number out of the air. So let's just talk about it, because you're a nutritional guy. You know all this stuff.
There's one comment I want to make on what you mentioned about not being on drugs, and many people are on many.
Yeah.
No one knows the effects of these drugs when you combine them, which is very interesting. People that are on more than one drug, they're actually creating compounds in their body, interreactions between all these drugs that no one in the pharmaceutical industry truly understands. So as far as I'm concerned, your average person that's on 4 or 5 medications is an experiment. There aren't comprehensive studies on what happens when you combine all these various drugs. Drug interreaction is known to some degree, but it's not fully known well enough to suit my taste. So I would say people that are on these drugs are all an experiment. But to go on with your question, I think there are certain rules that I've deduced, and based on what works and what doesn't work. And the first thing I would say is someone at least needs to have your level of awareness where they're not eating the things that are obviously horrible. The second thing is GMO foods, genetically modified foods, are banned in many parts of Europe. Monsanto, the company that actually spawns the GMO foods, as far as I have heard, doesn't allow GMO foods in the cafeterias of their own workplaces.
Oh,
which is
horrible.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So I would say that if a person is trying to live the straight and narrow and trying to be as healthy as possible, the first thing you have to understand is that GMO foods are just really bad news. And I can go on. I don't have to. Somebody could just go on the internet and search GMO foods. And once you get past the establishment's mainstream propaganda on it, and you get into the people who actually know about it, you'll learn why. GMO foods are not really recognized by your body because they're genetically modified. Your body has trouble recognizing them as such. Non-organic foods are horrible. They're produced with so much garbage, it would scare the hell out of you. If you eat foods that are like, if you eat animal products, which aren't either wild raised or grass fed or wild caught fish or something like that, you're eating garbage. So much so that I would say that they're two different foods. If you consider beef that's raised with corn, with antibiotics, with hormones, blah, 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 and you compare that to grass-fed beef that's organic, they are two different foods. The fatty acid composition in these two foods is totally different. And if you don't believe me, I challenge everybody out there listening to do this. Buy a standard hamburger that you get in your supermarket, and then buy a grass-fed hamburger. Cook both of these hamburgers in a skillet on your stove side by side. And then when they're finished cooking, observe cleaning the pans. You will find that the skillet that you cook the grass-fed hamburger in cleans very, very easily. The fats flow right off, as opposed to the skillet that you cook the traditional hamburger in. The fats stick to the pan and are difficult to get off. Well, the same thing is happening in your body and in your bloodstream with that meat that you're consuming, because the grass-fed meat has a fatty acid composition that leans much more towards salmon and all the healthy fats you hear about, where the The other hamburger, the traditional one, is higher in different fatty acids, which cause inflammation in your body. The key one is arachidonic acid, which is a fatty acid that causes inflammation. And the red meat that is grass-fed, given hormones, given antibiotics, is very high. I'm sorry, the red meat that's corn-fed is very high in this arachidonic acid, which is why it causes inflammation. The reason red meat has such a bad name for itself is because of the fact that it's corn-fed with antibiotics, with all kinds of junk in there, which are very unhealthy for your body. Red meat that's grass-fed is not.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these things, it's almost you have to differentiate. If someone starts saying, well, meat's bad for you, okay, well, what kind of meat are you talking about? Are you talking about the typical supermarket meat, or are you talking about something that's organically grown, that's grass-fed, that's not given antibiotics and hormones? They're two different things.
Now, the argument, one of the arguments for is cost and viability to raise all meats in a healthy grass-fed way. Like economically, and it's not possible, is what people say. You can't produce enough that way to feed all the people that eat meat. And of course, the cost is higher for healthier foods.
That's not true. If you go through to Whole Foods or your standard natural food market, you'll find that's not true. You'll find very often you can get sales on things, and you will find that the better stuff is sometimes not that much more expensive at all. And the farmers in Florida, I know I live in Florida, the Floridas in Florida who produce a tremendous amount of grass-fed beef would argue with you on that it's not true that there isn't enough. It's very feasible. That's an argument that's interesting. But I tell you what would knock that argument right off. Anyone who wants to read this, they should buy a book called Animal Factory. And the book Animal Factory explains the CAFO, the confined animal feeding operation. And when you read about how these animals are treated and what condition these animals are grown in, that consideration about this other food being more expensive is going to go right out the window. The book is written by David Kirby.
Okay. I was hoping that that was the direction you were going to go. I was kind of leading you into destroying that argument, because that argument is well, there's another part of that too. When you talk about cost, there's the front end cost, and then there's the absolutely ridiculous back end cost of ill health. So if you're not making people sick by, due to them eating, as you say, garbage, then you're saving money on the back end. So, for me, I'm happy to spend a little bit more on healthier foods up front. So I'm not, like I say, I'm not taking any medicines. So,
right.
So is it more expensive? No,
it's not. My wife depicted this very easily in a conversation she had. I heard once, she says they have it all figured out. They have you going in the restaurant or going in to eat the food that's poisonous. Then they have you coming out, going to the doctor to get the prescriptions. So they've got it all going. They've got a complete circle. Pretty soon they're going to have the funeral home connected to where the doctor is, and you'll be one complete circle. You go in, you buy the poisonous food, you get sick, you get the prescription, you drop dead, you go end up in the funeral home. So
yeah, it seems like the only way around this is for people to take responsibility for themselves, do a minimum amount of research. It's not that much to learn about this stuff. I mean, I'm no genius, and I just I read stuff a little bit, and I go, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
The part that is a little confusing to me, and I know you discussed this, is supplements. I never know. Even, in the health, and I've been to some nutritionists and all kinds of different practitioners, but I don't, and I understand that there's supplements that are better than other supplements, but how do you even know what to take and how to take it and who to rely on for this stuff? It's a very confusing marketplace. And what do you recommend to people?
It's confusing because there's a lot of propaganda that the companies that make the supplements dish out. They're not necessarily innocent in all this either.
Right.
They're trying to sell a product, and they throw out all kinds of information. Some of it's propaganda on taking these products. What I've learned over the years, I've been doing this since 1984. And what I've learned hands down is that when you take supplements, supplements are very powerful because they're concentrated nutrients. And when you take them, you really have to know what you're doing. You can't just rely on the hype and the propaganda that you read in health magazines and whatnot, because you can throw yourself completely out of balance. I will tell you a story. When I was first practicing, I had a medical doctor referred to me, and this medical doctor had a history of prostate problems.
Mm-hmm.
So the story, as he tells me, is he was reading the literature and he read that zinc was good for your prostate, beneficial for essential prostate function. So he theorized that his problem with his prostate must be a zinc deficiency. So he started taking 50 milligrams of zinc every day, and after about 3 or 4 weeks, his prostate started to improve. So he continued taking the zinc. His prostate improved to the point where it wasn't even an issue anymore. So he just continued to take the 50 milligrams of zinc over the next 3 or 4 years. Then suddenly the prostate problem came back. And he's scratching his head. He doesn't understand why, because he's been taking the zinc. So he decided he would double the zinc. Instead of taking 50 milligrams, he would take 100, and it got even worse. At this point, he was referred to me. He told me the story. I told him immediately, stop taking the zinc and start taking copper. So he looked at me, and I just said, just do this. And meanwhile, we're going to do a mineral test on your body to see what your mineral levels are. And I told him, probably what you've done is by taking the zinc by itself over all this time, you've created a copper deficiency. You've caused your zinc to go too high, and that's suppressing copper. And copper, as a mineral in your body, is the mineral that controls, to a degree, your susceptibility to bacterial infections. So he stopped the zinc, started taking the copper. Before the test even came back, he called me and told me, I don't know what's going on, how you figured this out, but my prostate's a lot better now. It stopped since I started taking the copper. So his test came in, and sure enough, his copper was grossly deficient. His zinc was in excess. It was actually zinc toxic at this point, and his copper was deficient. This simple story is an example of what can happen when you take supplements and don't know what you're doing. The solution is to go to a certified clinical nutritionist, not a dietitian. Dietitians don't know about supplements. They know about feeding people in large institutions. That's what dietitians do. You go to a hospital, you go to a nursing home, something like this. The dietitian is responsible for feeding all these people, making sure the Jell-O gets made and everything here. So you want to go to somebody who's a certified clinical nutritionist who does testing, who is going to test you to find out what you need. When you don't do a test and you go by opinion, this is where you end up having trouble. This is where you end up taking supplements you don't need. If you're properly tested, then you'll know what supplements you need based on the test, which is real life fact. Now, I want to separate for a second. There is functional testing that tells you what's happening with your body. And then there's genetic testing. Genetic testing is becoming all the rage since the 23andMe company and all these other companies that do gene testings to tell you what your weaknesses are. It's good to have both tests. A test that tells you what's happening right now in actual reality, and a gene test. But you must keep in mind the gene test is only telling you what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not telling you what is happening.
Yeah, it's a proclivity, possibly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you do not want to get a genetic test and then treat yourself based on your weak genes, because you don't know if those SNPs are active right now. You don't know if that is actually happening. That is only what's possible. It doesn't mean it's happening. So you want a functional test to understand your nutrient balance or imbalance, and then you want a genetic test where you can get some kind of idea of what to look for in the future or be aware of. But you don't treat yourself based on that.
Yeah, people have tendencies based on genetics, obviously, to develop or not develop certain things. I was wondering if part of what you do has to do with testing for inflammation, testing for hormones balance. Do you do all those kinds of things?
Those are all standard. Those are all standard in what we do. Yes.
Yeah. So that is really an amazing thing, because now as someone who's had prostate issues over the years, I've never really found something that, where it's just gone away. to where it's not an issue. So I should probably take a look at that
Well,
kind of testing.
there could be a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, sure.
It may not be the prostate directly.
Yes.
It could be something indirect that's affecting it. But the things that typically get overlooked are always the ones I like to talk about. The misdiagnosis that occurs. And very often in a lot of health issues, what gets misdiagnosed are sneaky infections, which doctors don't really know much about, which are parasitic infections, or candida, which is a fungal infection. Yeah. Candida and parasites can invade your prostate and cause the inflammation. Doctors still nowadays instinctually think everything is bacterial. Their first go-to is an antibiotic, and the antibiotics are what have gotten people in a big mess in this world. The overuse of antibiotics has caused a lot of trouble because the antibiotics destroy your natural intestinal biome, and that gives rise to candida and parasites. So that's the first thing, is you got to be wary of just jumping to the conclusion that it's always bacterial. The second area is toxic metals. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I know in my own practice, probably 40% of all the issues that people have are stemming from undiagnosed toxic metal problems. And that's arthritis, diabetes, whatever illness you want to discuss are in that 40%. The person's acquired toxic, and it might even be higher than that, but the person's acquired toxic metals from somewhere. And those metals are causing inflammation and nutritional imbalances in their body. And that's leading to the fancy disease that the doctor puts the name on.
That high?
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah. And the metals are being are getting into the body. How would you say? Through the foods mostly?
No, not mostly through foods. A lot of, well, it depends on the metal we're talking about. If we're talking about mercury and cadmium, a lot of the mercury problems come from amalgam fillings, which are still out there. There's still a lot of people with amalgams. The amalgams leach mercury and copper into the body. Plumbing can be copper based. It's not all the newfangled plastic that we have.
Yeah.
So if someone lives in an older house that has copper plumbing, as that plumbing gets older, it leaches copper. And how you can tell is if you look at your drain, and if your drain has any kind of a green stain to it, that's usually copper. If it has an orange stain, that's usually iron.
Yeah.
So you can occur from your own plumbing in your house or from the drinking water. If you have well water, people can end up with high levels of manganese and lead and cadmium. Then you also can look by profession. People who tend to work in the automotive industry as mechanics usually acquire elevated levels of many metals that are associated with the oils and the gasoline and the machinery that they're doing. And you can just go by profession profession, and you can see there's a certain category. People, for instance, who work with arts and crafts, because of the pigmentation that's in the paints and in the glues they use, they end up with a certain elevated level of toxic metals. So it's all basically, they're all around us. We had a person once who was a patient who later started to work for us as one of our staff members, who worked in a toy factory. And in the toy factory, her job was to operate this machine that was creating metal filings and dust.
Ooh.
And they didn't give you a mask in those days. This was like in the 70s. So she didn't wear a mask or anything. And she ended up having, I think, 6 or 7 elements in a toxic range from working there. They didn't wear gloves. So the metal filings and dust she'd be breathing in, they'd get on her skin and absorb into her blood.
I had a job once, very briefly, a company that made printed circuit boards. And there was a lot of chemicals, and the air was just, and I went to the owner after about a week. I didn't do it for a long, and I said, you can either fire me or move me to a place where I don't have to breathe this stuff. I don't really care. Mm-hmm. I'll stay here and I'll do something else, but I'm not going to be around this. And so he moved me to something else. Wow. But my body was going, oh my God, I feel like crap. And it was like 2-3 days in, and I stuck it out another 2 or 3. And I was like, I'm not going to die to help make this guy some money.
A friend of mine once, who was a runner, and he started to notice his blood pressure elevating for no reason. He couldn't think of anything he was doing differently. and I had him do a hair mineral test, and the test showed his iron had gone off the graph. Now, excess iron can cause high blood pressure, but not in your blood. We're talking about iron buildup in your tissues that stimulates your adrenal glands to release certain hormones that will raise your blood pressure. Cadmium can do that also, and nickel can do that. In his case, it was iron. And we were thinking, where is he getting this iron from? So, and we couldn't figure it out. So we started to talk about where he would run. And he was running along a path in Manhattan that was right under the Brooklyn Bridge. And the Brooklyn Bridge at that time was undergoing renovation. So they had guys up there with all kinds of gadgets and whatnot, and they were breaking down the metal and they were sanding the metal because they were repainting it. So all that metal dust was getting in the air. He was breathing it all in, and it elevated his blood pressure.
That's scary when you think about fine particles of dust, but it's actually metal. It's not dirt. It's just metal. Wow, that's scary stuff.
I had another friend, same kind of situation. His blood pressure was elevated, couldn't figure out why. We did the test. His cadmium was elevated. So we went through a whole list of things that were high in cadmium, and ended up being the tea he was drinking every day. The particular brand of tea that he drank was high in cadmium. So he stopped the tea. He got on some things to detox the cadmium from his body. 6 months later, his pressure went back to normal.
Just saw some sort of a video, or I can't remember. It might have been an article about chocolate, and some of the brands that are supposedly healthy chocolate have cadmium and lead in them.
Cadmium and nickel are the most common things found in chocolate. That's true.
Is that from what, the factories?
It's naturally occurring in the plant. This brings us to another interesting thing, is different plants have natural affinities towards different elements. And if cadmium or nickel is present in the soil where the cocoa is being grown, it will pull that up.
But why is it present in that soil? Is that from mining, or is that just the way the earth is?
That's probably multiple reasons. It's probably situational depending on where it is.
Okay.
Because it's not generally true all over. It's, as you said, it was certain brands that they found. So it would depend on that area. But you have to remember too, these elements are natural to the soil. Cadmium is even though it's a toxic substance, it is organic. All of these elements are organic. They're naturally found on Earth. So where they're found in high amounts, and if a plant is there that has an affinity for them and will draw them in, that's a roll of the dice.
You know what's an interesting thing is about sometimes, particularly physicians, they say they'll run a test and they'll say, well, you're fine. You're within the normal range. They have these ranges for different things.
The range is based on pathology. It's based on survey groups. The lab gets a hold of a whole bunch of people who do not have disease. We're not saying they're ideally healthy.
Yeah, right.
They don't have it's lack of a major disease. That's the medical definition of health, is the absence of a major disease or major pathology. Nutritionist definition of health is quite different. It would be a person who has vim and vigor for life, who's able to actually function, who doesn't have runny nose, watery eyes, or aches and pains in their joints every time he tries to reach for a Coke or something like this. This is a totally different definition of health. But yes, a blood test, the medical range is set up so here they have observed an absence of pathology in that range. Now, a nutritionist has a totally different way to look at it. What a nutritionist does when they look at your blood test is they take the reference range. Let's say you're looking at alkaline phosphatase, which is an enzyme in your blood, and the range is 60 to 100. We take 60 on 100, we add it together, we get 160. Now we divide it by 2. That gives us 80. And now we go plus or minus 5 or 10 on either side as a buffer. So our goal for that test is 80. And if you're out of that 80, how far you are away from the 80 or away from the 5 or 10 plus minus on each side tells us you're that far away from the ideal level of that. And that's usually where the area of nutritional imbalances will be found.
That actually makes sense. That makes complete sense, because what's funny is a doctor will say, well, you're fine, I looked at your range, and then you might say, well, I don't feel great. Well, you're fine. You're fine.
Well,
The numbers say you're fine, but I don't
right.
feel good.
Right. Then there could be a million reasons why that is. The person
Yeah.
could have numerous deficiencies, imbalances, etc.
How did you get started in this field? Because it's like you were saying, the dietitians and sort of the early uh, start of nutrition even was all about yeah, I just remember the 3 food groups when I was a kid. That was,
Right.
I mean, a long time ago. None of that, almost none of it do I eat
Right.
at this point.
Right.
But it's what sparked your interest in going further into this, where this has become your life's work?
Well, I was a musician initially, and
Yeah.
I was in college. I have a degree. I have a college degree in music. I was a classical guitarist. I taught kids how to
Nice.
play like Jimi Hendrix for a living.
Yeah.
And my father developed cancer.
Okay.
And I started researching a little bit about this. And I asked the doctors who were treating him, what about vitamins? And what about herbs? And what about all these things that I'm reading about? And they were vehemently against it and were completely blank, didn't know what any of it. I asked the doctor one day if my father should take lecithin, and he said, I've never met Mr. Lecithin. So I really couldn't say.
Whoa.
Right. So when somebody is someone in a position of authority like that is so vehemently against something, that gets me curious. So, if you were to tell me I can't research it, I'm going to research it. If you're going to say you can research it, I'm going to research it. It makes no difference. So I started to research all about nutrition and about the medical profession and how the medical profession, from the drug companies down, of course, was not too thrilled with all this health food and vitamins and whatnot, because it was basically going to infringe on their business. So that sparked me to study. And the more I studied, the more fascinated I became, because I started to see its application. Once I saw its application, I was sold. I went back to school, to naturopathic school, and became a naturopathic doctor.
Wow. And how old were you when this transpired?
I was 24.
Oh, young.
23, 24. And I got out of naturopathic school around 28. And I started practicing. But I would see it so much in people. So many people, friends, relatives would come with all these problems. And I would give them just, little advice about things I was learning. And when they took the advice and did it, they had results.
What happened with your dad at that point? Was he following any of the things you were kind of coming up with, or?
Well, actually, he passed away before I started to really get into it.
Oh, okay.
But it was the interaction I had with his doctors. Them being so vehemently against it got me very suspicious.
I've had that with doctors where they get so, just even asking a simple question, they get upset. I had a doctor that prescribed something to me. I was in my 20s. I said, well, what are the possible side effects I should watch out, pay attention to? He goes, oh, don't worry about that. You'll be fine. I said, well, could I see the PDR and take a look at it? And he goes, how do you know about that?
Wow.
The physician's desk reference if that has all the pills in it for people who don't know what PDR stands for. And
right.
So he took it down from his bookshelf and he found the thing and he handed it to me and he let me read it, looking at me the whole time like, I was some sort of a, troublemaker. It was just, how do you know about that? Well, like, what are you, like some kind of a god that you're the only one that has access to a book?
This is a good point. Yes.
And he was a very nice man. He just believed that he was, above in some way. And that's, I think, a mistake and I'm seeing less doctors acting that way. Maybe it's because I've gotten older and I'm their age or they're younger than me, that they don't do that arrogant thing with me that as much as I remember when I was younger, which I'm happy about. I'm very happy.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural issue. Like there's a cultural change now in that, used to be the doctor was God, and we now know they're not, because there's a lot of things they don't know. Their training is not as broad of a scope. Ideally, a doctor should be trained in all things naturopathic and clinical nutrition, but you're probably adding several more years onto their training. So But yes, it's a cultural change, I think, that's taken place.
Well, I'm happy to see that. I mean, my own, practitioner is, he does acupuncture and he's open to different, and he's not a naturopath or any of that. So he's a very straight ahead trained MD, but he's open to stuff. He's open.
Well, if he's doing acupuncture, he's already in a league that's quite different.
Yeah,
most of the medical doctors wouldn't.
I know, and I can talk to him about anything. I don't, and he's got his limitations, as he would say himself, because you can't learn everything, particularly the way the medical schools teach. Like, as you say, they don't really teach nutrition. They don't really teach things about the combination of body, mind, and spirit, the things that make a human being a whole human being. It's really, you're basically learning construction work. It's kind of
they get about 5 hours, believe it or not. If you all total nutrition, I think it used to be about 5 hours, and that was mostly dealing with pregnant women and geriatrics. That was about it. They don't really, they don't study it. It's quite different. That's all I did. What they study is pharmacology primarily. Yeah. And the study of pharmacology for the medical doctor is laid down by the drug companies.
Another aspect to, and this has to do with insurance and money, which is diagnostic codes, which are very limited in their scope. It's like, well, we're not going to pay for this because there's no, we got to have a code. We have to have a number for the thing that it is, and when you start labeling things too specifically, you don't get the big picture. And it's kind of counterproductive to holistic health.
What's scary when you hear stories from people who go to a doctor's office and the doctor and the staff are insisting they have to have this procedure. You must have it done. You must have it done as soon as possible. And then as soon as they find out the insurance isn't going to cover it, they say, oh, it's okay. You really don't need it anyway.
I've had that a few times where I've had to turn stuff down because I didn't think it was necessary. And luckily I've been right because of my instincts and sort of looking at the information. It's like, well, I want to do this test just to make sure. Well, you know what? I don't need to make sure. I know my body, and there's nothing happening there in that arena. So you're not doing that test. I'm a little skeptical on the and I've done one colonoscopy. What do you think about those? I think if you I don't really know. I mean, I did one, but I was kind of like, do I really need to do this? I mean, it felt very harsh and invasive in a way that felt like it could actually do some sort of a harm if it wasn't done correctly, for sure. But what do you think about that?
Well, in order for every medical practice, depending on what their specialty is, for them to keep their gross income where it needs to be, they have to have testing that you agree to do because you want to make sure that you're on top of something or you're current with what your status on this might be. And it becomes very blanketed. Like they'll take a colonoscopy would be for colon cancer. And then for women, it'd be different types of mammograms.
Yeah.
And it just goes across the board. Everybody should do it because if everybody does it, then that keeps our gross income up to a certain point. Maybe a saner way to do it would be to look at somebody who's has a history of colon cancer in their family, and then even above that, then look at their lifestyle and see whether or not this is something that's really warranted. Like if I had a person who came to me and they had a history of colon cancer in their family, multiple people had it, and they were very constipated and had a lot of colon and digestive issues, I would say this could warrant somebody having the test. Does everybody just need to rotely do these tests? As you said, no. I don't. I think there's
what's every 10 years after age 55 or 50.
Right. I mean, that goes with the statistics of when it's most likely to occur. But then again, look at the person. Now, if someone's doing genetic testing, this is what blows all this all out of the water. If you're doing genetic testing, and you come up with the fact that you don't have the genes that are typical in someone who's going to get colon cancer, or you don't have the genes that are typical for someone who's going to get breast cancer or uterine cancer or whatever, and that's a whole different story. So much of what happens with health is genetic. And once genetic tests are really utilized by health practitioners correctly, you can streamline and pinpoint all these things and who's really a candidate for what. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. As a matter of fact, where we are right now is that companies that do genetic testing will advertise how they do not let your information out, regardless of who asks for it, that your information is protected. Because what the problem or the consideration is, if your insurance company gets a hold of your genetic test and they find out that you're genetically susceptible to whatever is going to cost them a lot of money, if that actually happens, then they're going to want to drop you. So we're not at the point of using that information on the plus side. This is what on the minus we're on right now.
Yeah, that's a really scary thing. You know, it's like, well, I don't have it. Yeah, but you could. So we're going to.
Right. Therefore, we're going to drop you.
That's like a casino. That's a casino mentality. You know, we're going to.
Now, instead, that we should be using that information. The practitioner, whoever your lead practitioner is, should have that data, and he should say, well, you know, you're susceptible to this and this, so we want to make sure we do these tests every once in a while to make sure it's not happening. And then you should have this kind of a diet, and you should take these supplements based on protecting you, or something along the line, not just, you know, not being ignorant to the data. The data should be used for something positive.
I was going to ask you about something that's come up a few times in this podcast that I still don't understand completely, is phages, Phages. I'm spelling it for the audience, not you. Can you explain a little bit about what's going on with that and what it is?
If it's the same thing I'm thinking of, I don't know if we're on the same page, but phages are white blood cells. And what these white blood cells engage in a process called phagocytosis, which is where the white blood cell literally eats something that's bad. Mm-hmm. If it's a bacteria or a germ or something that's bad, the phagocyte will approach this substance and then go through the process of phagocytosis, which is the blood cell actually eating and devouring for the purpose of destroying and eliminating whatever that germ or that cell is.
Okay. So I know there's some studies going on with that and some interesting things that have happened where phages from one person's body are either transplanted or somehow get into another person, and then they start to get some of the traits that the other person had. For example, there was somebody that had some sort of a transplant. I don't know if it was a fecal transplant, which I've been hearing a little bit about. But the person that was the donor was overweight, and this other person who had never had issues with weight problems got these phages and started to put on all this weight.
Yeah, that wouldn't exactly be from the phages. There are different blood cells that actually, what these blood cells do in urine. Well, they're not blood cells really. They're bacteria, and they're part of your microbiome.
Yeah.
So there are certain bacteria that increase the amount of calories somebody absorbs from their food. And if you don't have that bacteria, that reduces the amount of calories that you absorb from your food. So that specifically are bacteria.
Really fascinating stuff when you think about it.
As far as the rectal implants go,
the
rectal implants are strange, in my opinion.
Well, just to say it is strange.
It's strange because it's unnecessary, because we have probiotics you can buy in a store.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of a rectal implant is you're taking allegedly the microbiome from somebody who's healthy and you're giving it to somebody who's compromised.
Yes.
Now, what I say is when you do that, you don't know what you're giving this other person, and you don't know what their immune system is able to handle or not. The person who's apparently healthy may have an organism that his body is living with, that there's a certain like homeostasis, let's say, between that organism and his immune system. His immune system may be in some kind of cooperative condition with that organism. If you give it to the other person who doesn't have any immunity built up, it might be devastating. It could make him very sick. So the smarter thing to do is go to the store and buy probiotics.
I want to get into exactly what your company does and what you do as a practitioner. Let's say I come to you and I say, hey, Michael, I feel pretty good, but I'd like to be at optimal health. What can we do to achieve that and get to that point? And how does that begin? And what do you do? And then what's the consultation part? What's the testing look like? What are the costs? How do I do that?
Well, we would listen, of course, to what exactly you're saying, and then it's very simple. We listen to what you're saying, and then we run the appropriate testing to determine what it could be, what could be the problem, and then we address whatever we find is wrong on the testing. The majority of the people who come to me come for digestive problems that are where they suspect they have candidiasis, which is fungal overgrowth in their intestines, which usually they get from taking antibiotics.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the majority of the people come to me because that's what my specialty is. And that's the book that I wrote called The Candida Chronicles covers my journey in understanding the mystery of this candida and why so many doctors can't treat it and why it's a failed treatment plan for most people. So that's what most people come to me for. But I'm not. My practice is not limited to that because way before I was a specialist in that, we were doing general nutrition where we were looking to optimize someone's biochemistry by testing them and finding out what their weak points are. So a person would come to me, we'd run different tests. The tests can vary depending on what the person's problem is. But the idea is we want to run tests to pinpoint what it is that is the issue. And very typically you get people coming to you with fatigue. Now, fatigue can be caused by a handful of things. It could be caused by a chronic infection you have in your body that you're unaware of that's not been diagnosed. That could be cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus. It could be from candida. It could be from parasites that you acquired. It could be from some bacteria. It could be from Lyme disease. There could be a host of different chronic infections that you have that might even be subclinical in your body, not at the point of being clinically acknowledged. So we test for those things to see if it's an infection. If it's not an infection, it could be something along the line of hormones. It could be a lack of adrenal hormones. It could be a lack of thyroid hormone or an inability of your body to use those hormones. That could be causing your fatigue. It could be a deficiency you have of different nutrients that help your cellular mitochondria create energy. It could be and now on the other hand, it could be something toxic in your body. You might be exposed to some kind of chemical or medical toxin that's sapping your energy.
There's a lot of factors. We're complicated machines, but then it seems like we can you start to mitigate some of those things, and then maybe some new things become clearer as maybe one thing goes away. You might become apparent that something else is actually underneath that, or it just sort of rises to the number one slot of a problem.
Right. That's peeling the onion, peeling the layers. Most important thing is it all begins with testing. If you go to a practitioner who doesn't test you, that's the first thing I would warn somebody. If you go to a nutritionist or any type of practitioner who's looking to discover what's wrong or what your complaint is about, he's got to run tests. If he doesn't run tests, even if he has the strongest opinion in the world and he's seen this happen a million times, there's still no guarantee that's the same thing that's happening to you. You have to have tests. Now, another viewpoint, why you need to have a test to confirm what's going on is because if you don't test to establish a baseline for your problem, you can't come back and retest to see if the problem's really fixed. Just from that alone, being truly scientific about it, you test to establish the problem's there. You treat the problem however you're going to treat it. Then you come back and you retest, and you now have a test that proves it's handled. So that eliminates that. And now if you still have the complaint, you now know it's coming from something else. This is the scientific method. Now, I was very lucky. When I got out of naturopathic school, I ran into a group of aerospace physiologists who were working at Grumman on a computer model that was to be used by the astronauts when they were in the space station for long periods of time to assess their nutrient balance. So I learned from these guys the scientific method.
Now, we were talking about a little bit about genetics. I want to ask you a couple things. Well, but the first one is when we talk about alcoholism and drug addiction, and it does run in families. what is the genetic piece of that? Is there some sort of a way to mitigate that within families that have it? And maybe it isn't just, it's probably not just genetic. There's probably some sort of family history that would sort of perpetuate those kinds of things. But then there are people that have addiction that don't come from families that have it. So what is the genetic piece of that? Because I know there's a lot of people struggling with not just drug and alcohol, but food addiction and other types of addictions.
Well, that's the first thing that you want to find out, is whether or not it's genetic or not. Specifically when it comes to drugs and alcohol, because there are genes that definitely make the person's opiate receptors in their brain more active. Elevated dopamine a lot of times causes the person to crave these things. And there are genes, there are very specific genes that will induce alcoholism. Now, now you can't change somebody's genes. We don't at this point, it's not something you can do on a daily basis, is modify someone's genes. In the future, who knows? But right now you can't. So right now, if you find that a person has a genetic tendency towards something, there are definitely things you can do to mitigate that by helping to balance their biochemistry and getting their biochemistry to compensate. That's something we do on a daily basis in my practice. And it's very doable. So in considering this specific area, when you're dealing with alcoholics, all alcoholics are hypoglycemic. That's the first thing you have to understand. And if you want proof, go to the AA meeting, look at the back of the room at the table, and you'll notice that the table has an assortment of all this sugar, because what they're doing is they're substituting sugar for alcohol. So you have to basically treat them like they're hypoglycemics. And if you do that, they'll lose the craving for the alcohol and the sugar.
I've seen that, so I know exactly what you're talking about. That's why I was laughing. Yeah, it's and I don't eat sugar, but because it took me a long time. It was the hardest thing for me to let go of for a variety of reasons, because you do get a little bit of a buzz off. But what it created for me was teeth grinding and digestive issues and mood swings and lethargy, all those things. And I was like, I can't eat this stuff. It's getting harder and harder to handle it as I got a little bit older. And then I just went, you can't do this anymore. This is it was like the effects were so crummy that I just went, you got to just stop.
White sugar is an interesting thing. It doesn't really exist in nature. White sugar is refined. Cane sugar is refined to be white sugar, and goes along the same line as flour. White flour doesn't exist in nature either.
Yeah.
Very funny. One Christmas at my house, I had all my relatives over, and I was making whole wheat pasta. And my cousin turned and looked at me, and he looked at this and he says, "Wow, that's whole wheat. Is that whole wheat pasta?" And he said, "How long have they had that?"
Since the plant started to grow.
Yeah. I said, "Well, gee, the better question is, how long have they had white pasta?"
Yeah.
Because white flour is the innovation here. White flour is that's the thing that's new, not the whole wheat.
Every time I would eat white flour, in pasta especially, I would go to sleep.
Well, how white flour developed. The reason why it exists is based on trade and commerce. Because when they would try to ship whole grain, the bugs would eat it in transit. So they looked to see what it was the bugs were eating, and they would discover it was the outside shell, so to speak, the bran or the germ, which had all the nutrients, all the protein, all the B vitamins, all the fatty acids. So they got the idea, let's refine this, let's strip this stuff off, and let's change this into a product that even the bugs don't want to eat. This way we can transport it. So
you're basically eating cardboard.
For the most part. This is why you get the term enriched flour. You see, this is the cycle of events.
Well, we put back in the stuff.
Enriched flour, right? Enriched flour means we're going to put back the nutrients, which we know will cause a disease if you don't have them. So you'll see enriched flour, they add B3, niacin, because they don't want you to get pellagra. They'll add vitamin B1 back in because they don't want you to have beriberi. So any disease, they'll put vitamin C because they don't want you to have scurvy. So they'll enrich the flour with only the nutrients that will prevent you from having a deficiency disease, and that's called enriched.
Yeah, that word has always been suspect. Every time I go, what are you enriching? How bad is this thing? You got to enrich it.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Well, when you have a product that the bugs don't even want to eat, you have to pay attention to that, I guess.
I I would imagine that would be a wise move. So if people want to get a hold of you, well, let me ask you this. I want to finish this question. I come to you and I say, hey, I'll give you a couple specifics. They may apply to me, they may not. I don't have the energy I'd like to have. My ambition is a little bit low. I'm not losing weight. I'm not able to create any muscle mass with working out or very little. Um, and you would say, well, let's run these tests. Does insurance cover it? What is the cost? I just want to make it so people know what this would entail. And I know everything is specific to the person, but just if I give you those symptoms, let's say,
First thing I'm gonna look at in a person like that,
yeah,
is their testosterone levels. Because when immediately you hit the buzzword when you said muscle mass, I'm not able to put on muscle mass. That's usually due to low testosterone. So we're going to want to test the person to find out what's happening with their testosterone metabolism. So that means finding out their testosterone level, the other hormones that help testosterone or that go against testosterone, and then also look at all the nutrition that's involved with producing testosterone.
Okay. So those tests would be like, well, I had my testosterone tested, and it was within the range, but it was low.
Yeah, we always shoot for the upper limit.
Right.
When
it
the
was like
upper limit
480 or something, and
because the upper limit represents when a younger person, like there's an acceptable testosterone could be on a blood test between 30 and 600. But what they'll tell you is like 30 is what's expected and normal of an 80-year-old man, and 600 is what's expected and normal of somebody in their 20s. So you would always want to try to aim to be in your 20s as far as that goes.
Yeah. Right. In other words, well, settle for what the average 80-year-old is, and you can say, well, I don't want to settle for that.
Right. Well, that's why I feel the way I do. So I want it to be better.
Yeah. So why not shoot for the optimal range? So what? Right. So insurance covers your testing with certain companies, or is it all
depends.
Out of pocket?
It depends on the company. It depends on the person's policy more importantly.
Okay. All right.
Because a policy is really more what dictates that. And then sometimes they want the person's own personal physician, their medical doctor, to write a letter of medical necessity, it's called.
Oh yeah.
So if the person's insurance covers it, then sometimes they would need to get a letter from their doctor saying, we're not just doing these tests to have fun. There's a medical reason why I want this test done. And if you give that data to the insurance company, usually they'll cover it.
Okay. That's good to know. All right. So if people want to get a hold of you and have a consultation and figure out what's going on with them, if maybe some of the things we've talked about have resonated with them and they're curious to find out more about creating optimal health, how do they get a hold of you, and how does that work?
Well, generally, the person would go to our main website, which is www.health-truth.com. And that's the general website that covers everything. If the person feels that their problem is particularly candida overgrowth or some kind of intestinal dysbiosis, they would want to go to the New York City Candida doctor. And if the person has known thyroid problems, because that's another thing we specialize in, they'd want to go to the New York City thyroid doctor website.
Okay. Is that spelled out New York?
Yes, exactly. Exactly as it sounds.
Yeah. Okay. It's not NYC. It's New York City.
New York City thyroid doctor or New York City Candida doctor.
Wonderful.
But the main website is health-truth.com. The dash is the hyphen.
Now, is there anything else you'd like to cover while you're here? Because I could do this all day, by the way. This is so interesting to me. I literally could talk. I could go through from feet all the way. I could go from foot fungus all the way up to baldness and everything in between. I'd be interested, but that's, we don't have that kind of time, but that's how interested in this stuff I am. So,
well, that's cool. I think we've got it pretty much covered to give it a good general briefing on the current state of health.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate your time. It's really been a delightful conversation. I just, I mean, it's that this kind of knowledge that, I haven't schooled myself in any of it, but I love it, and which I think, for the people listening, you can learn quite a bit without having to be an actual physician or any kind of trained person. You can still have a vital, healthy life and utilize people like Michael to even improve, your own knowledge. So I super appreciate you having you on the show.
I always encourage people to do research on their own to find out what's really going on. Don't just necessarily believe the powers that be.
Agreed. Well, have a fantastic day. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, my friend. You too.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. Check out the website, theexplodinghuman.com, the YouTube channel, The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Again, I want to thank Dr. Michael Biamonte for being on the show. We are going to do another episode in a few weeks, which will be primarily focused on brain health. And I'm really looking forward to that one. You guys have a great day. Thanks so much for listening.